Hello AP World History students, Mr. Lassiter with you, and in this video we are going to continue our Period 5 review for the AP World History exam, 1750 to 1900, dealing with industrialization and global integration. As you watch this video and listen, you may complete the review packet if you would like. It is linked in the description down below. And if you need more information than this overview provides, I recommend starting with AP Worldopedia or Freemanpedia, which are two of my favorite websites. And I also advise you to go take a look at your course textbook or the review book that you may have purchased as you study for this exam. So let's go ahead and get started with key concept 5.3, Nationalism, Revolution, and Reform. So there are about four major concepts for this key concept, four major ideas dealing with nationalism, revolution, and reform. The first is all about the Enlightenment, and so we'll talk a great deal about that, which is what this image is showing. We also see the development of the ideas of nationalism, the increasing discontent with imperial rule that we see in revolutionary movements and reformist movements in this time period, and how we see transnational ideologies and solidarities develop in the world throughout this time due to political and social thought changing. So let's go ahead and get started by talking about the Enlightenment. It is the rise and diffusion, as the key concepts say, of Enlightenment thought that questioned established traditions in all areas of life and preceded the revolutions and rebellions against existing governments in this time period. So we're going to talk a little bit about Enlightenment philosophers, revolutionary documents, and the expansion of rights for this trend. Enlightenment philosophers applied new ways of understanding the natural world to human relationships. They encouraged observation and inference in all spheres of life. The Enlightenment thinkers gained a lot from the scientific revolution that had occurred in the 17th century. They started to see that reason, as opposed to revelation, could lead humans to better our society, as it did with deepening our understanding of the world around us. And Enlightenment philosophers began to apply that same idea of reason and experimentation and thought to new political ideas about the individual, about natural rights, and about social contract. And this is seen primarily in the work of many Enlightenment philosophers, but four major ones that the AP Key Concepts ask you to know. The first, on the far left here, is Voltaire. Now, Voltaire was a satirist, and he was very much critical of corruption within government and the role in which he felt religion played in that corruption. These Enlightenment philosophers were not very far removed from the wars of religion that resulted from the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic response to that Protestant Reformation. And so, seeing religion as one of the root causes of warfare and conflict, oppression, and silencing of critics, Enlightenment philosophers sought to separate the church and the state. Of course, that will become a foundational principle of many Western constitutions. The second man here, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, will expand on the third man's ideas, John Locke, and he develops the idea of social contract theory. Enlightenment philosophers believed that the power of government did not necessarily come from some supreme authority, but instead came from the people themselves, and that the people gave up some of their own rights to the government in exchange for protection. And if the government was not protecting them, then the contract was broken. And so Rousseau develops this social contract theory largely based on the extension of arguments from our next philosopher, and maybe the most important to know from this time period, and that is John Locke. Locke believed in two major concepts. One, as I've kind of alluded to, is the idea of the consent of the governed, that the government's power comes from the people consenting to live under that government, but that the government must preserve the people's natural rights. This is the idea that from birth you have certain, as Thomas Jefferson would call them, inalienable rights, rights that cannot be taken away from you. And those John Locke called life, liberty, and property. And those words will be changed in the Declaration of Independence to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the idea that the government not only gets its power from the people, but must not infringe upon an individual's rights was very different than what many Europeans were experiencing in the development of absolutist governments from our previous time period. And the last piece of this puzzle that the AP College Board wants you to know is the Baron de Montesquieu, who you see on the far right. He looked at the government of England as a pretty good model for what government should be. And he saw that he said there were basically three major powers of government: the power to make laws, the power to enforce laws, and the power to make decisions on legality or punishment for laws. Those were the legislative powers, the executive powers, and the judicial powers. And he believed that these powers should be completely separate within a government. That they're, if a person or people were to have control over more than one or all three of those powers, then tyranny would result or would be quite possible. So these Enlightenment philosophers come up with new critiques of government and new understandings of how government should behave in order to provide the best outcomes for its people. The ideas of Enlightenment philosophers are reflected in many revolutionary documents, but three specific ones that you are asked to know. They influence resistance to existing political authority. And these documents, first of all, are the 1776 Declaration of Independence from the United States of America, principally written by Thomas Jefferson, which laid out the argument for the United States, or what would become the United States, the colonies at the time, to dissolve its bonds with the British government. And it laid out the Enlightenment philosophy behind the decision to break this contract, so to speak, with Great Britain. It also laid out the grievances colonists had with the Crown of England, and it formally stated that the colonists were going to form a new contract and be bound together as the United States. Now, the American Revolutionary War had begun already a year before, but this document made it clear that the Enlightenment or Enlightenment influences were spurring this revolution and would be the foundation of what would eventually become a new constitution for the United States after the Articles of Confederation largely failed. A second document is one that is very similar to this Declaration of Independence, and it comes out of the French Revolution in 1789, and that is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And this is principally written by the Marquis de Lafayette, American war hero and French revolutionary. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen states similarly the equality of all men before the law. It expresses the natural rights of life, liberty, and property, among other things. I think 17 in all articles in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And this becomes a foundational document, and although the French Revolution has its ups and downs, this document will be a lasting impact, or will have a lasting impact on France even to the modern day. And the third revolutionary document is Simone Bolivar's Jamaica letter. while in exile, the revolutionary Simone Bolivar writes this letter laying out his argument for breaking with Spanish colonial rule. So these are the three major documents that you need to know that come out of the Enlightenment. Of course, the last thing in dealing with the rise and diffusion of Enlightenment thought is that Enlightenment ideas influence many people to challenge existing notions of social relations. And so this is going to contribute to the expansion of rights. And that is seen in three different things. First of all, the expansion of suffrage. Now, the expansion of suffrage we usually associate with the suffragette movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries that expanded the right to women, or for women to vote. And of course, many women do not get the right to vote until this time period is over. But suffrage was also expanded to include eventually all men, or at least a greater number of men. At the beginning of this time period, it would not be uncommon, even if you were allowed to vote, or even if your country did include the votes of its citizens, it would not be uncommon for you to not be able to vote if you did not own property or have some sort of stake in property stake in society. And so we see the expansion of suffrage to greater and greater amounts of people. This occurs in the United States in the 1820s, and then again following the Civil War, in theory anyways. And suffrage will expand elsewhere as well, in Britain, as it coincides with reforms made in response to industrialization, which we saw in Key Concept 5.1. A second expansion of rights that we see in this time period is the abolition of slavery. And that is slow coming, but it does, in fact, come in this time period. Britain takes a leading role in the abolition movement, putting pressure on governments to end the slave trade and end slavery within their borders, oftentimes through economic pressure. In the United States, of course, it took a civil war to bring slavery to an end, but that did not end the intense racism in the American South, but also in the whole of the nation. And another thing that we see, of course, is an end to serfdom. For example, the French Revolution brought to an end the medieval social structures of the first, second, and third estates, completely changing the social makeup of society. But we also see, eventually, for example, the end of serfdom in Russia and other European countries, where it had traditionally been found. So this expansion of rights, goes along with these changes, is experienced along with these changes that we see coming out of the Enlightenment, as there are new ways of thinking in this time period. So that brings us to our second big idea for Key Concept 5.3, and that is the idea of nationalism. Beginning in the 18th century, peoples around the world developed a new sense of commonality, and that was based primarily on language, religion, social customs, and physical territory, boundaries that make up one's country. And we commonly refer to this as nationalism, and you see the definition here on your screen. Loyalty and devotion to a nation, a sense of national consciousness, exalting one nation above others and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interests, as opposed to those of other nations or supranational groups. Intense nationalism was one of the causes of World War I that we see, and also we can say World War II most likely. So when we think of nationalism, this is something new that develops in this time period. People began to see their commonalities as communication and exchange draws people together. And these newly imagined communities link this identity with the borders of the state, while governments use this idea to unite diverse populations. And we have many different examples of nationalism throughout history, but in this time period, there are four that really stand out in uniting groups of people together. The first two are found in Europe. German nationalism forms a uniting, or creates a uniting force, bringing together the people of Germany. They have a common language. They had common religious history. They had a common political history. The Austro-Prussian War, the Franco-Prussian War, gave these Germans something to unite around. And eventually, under Otto von Bismarck, Germany coalesces into a single nation for the first time, really, that we had seen in modern history. It had been divided into principalities for so long. Italy, we see this as well. Italians, people who spoke the same language and shared a history that harkened back to the days of the Romans. They shared a Catholic culture. They had long been divided, being controlled by Austrians at times, and the French at times, and the Spanish at times. And as we get into the 1800s, part of Italy is under control of Austria. And you have the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. You have the Papal States, and just a disunified Italy, which starts to realize that they can bring themselves together with this common culture, eventually uniting and forming a single nation. The Philippines, also we start to see in the Philippine Islands a sense of nationalism develop as they yearn for independence during the Spanish-American War, and then realize the United States are not going to give them independence. Instead, they're going to take over. So Filipinos unite together in a war against the United States, albeit unsuccessful, that serves as a uniting force for Filipino nationalism. And lastly, of course, Argentina in South America, to round it out geographically. Argentinian independence, led by Jose de San Martin, is kind of the first thing that unites people together. But then Argentina expands. Eventually, there's a great deal of European immigration coming to Argentina, and the leaders of Argentina feel that that would dilute their national identity. And so they start to champion, quote-unquote, Grand Argentina, to create a national identity to bind the country together. Now, these are four major examples of nationalism, but that are listed in the key concepts, but I could not move on without also mentioning the importance of nationalism within the French state. This comes out of the French Revolution, and we see that France becomes a country that has a national flag. They develop a national anthem. They develop national pride among their commonalities, which bind them together, eventually being the revolution itself, and then the victories of Napoleon in those Napoleonic Wars. And those ideas of the French Revolution and nationalism will spread throughout Europe as the French kind of march around from city to city, winning battles until eventually Napoleon and his armies are turned back. But that spirit of nationalism spreads throughout Europe, and certainly influences Germany and Italy, as well as sparking some discontent within countries like Austria, which are multinational empires, which now must deal with communities within their borders coming together and demanding independence. The Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe, the dwindling empire, had to deal with this as well, and it is manifested in wars for Greek independence, for example, as the Greeks themselves saw themselves as a distinct nationality, and then eventually, of course, they win their independence. So a lot to be said about this development of a new sense of commonality, a new nationalism, which certainly will play a role in revolutionary movements in this time period as well. Our third big idea in Key Concept 5.3 is what we see within imperial rule, an increasing discontent with it, which propelled reformist and revolutionary movements. In pretty much every region of the world with imperial governments, we have subjects challenging that centralized rule. And there are two examples I want to give you of this, which you see on this video. One occurring in India, for example. As the Mughal Empire weakened in its latter days, subjects within India, especially the Marathas, challenged Mughal sultans in India. They largely are credited with creating a confederacy or empire in the Deccan plateau of India and weakening the Mughal Empire, enabling Britain to move in and establish greater control. Of course, when the British arrive and take over India, we see an anti-colonial movement develop, which I'll talk about momentarily. Within the Qing dynasty, or the Qing Empire in China, we see another group challenge their imperial government. The Taiping Rebellion challenges the Manchu Qing dynasty, weakening it greatly and requiring the Qing dynasty to turn to Europeans for help. Now, the Taiping themselves were reacting to what they saw as Western influence and a weakening of the Manchu or Qing dynasty's mandate of heaven. And it began as kind of a religiously inspired movement, eventually the Taiping taking over the capital and holding on to it for some time before they are finally defeated. But nevertheless, these empires, which had been weakening, fall to these revolutionary movements, or at least are weakened more completely by these revolutionary movements, allowing Europeans to move in. We also see in this time period American colonial subjects lead a series of rebellions, which facilitated the emergence, of course, of independent states in the United States, as well as Haiti and mainland Latin America. So when I say American colonial subjects, I don't want you to think United States of America, but the Americas as in North and South America plus the Caribbean. We also see French subjects rallying against their monarchy. And so we have some major examples of rebellions shown here. The picture on the far left, the idealized image of Washington crossing the Delaware from the American Revolution. The second image, the political cartoon that perfectly sums up the roots of the French Revolution, is the first and second estate, the clergy and the nobility ride on the back of the third estate, the oppressed masses of France. As a result of the French Revolution, we see the door open for the first and most successful or complete slave rebellion that occurs in the Americas, and that is the Haitian Revolution, a revolution led by Toussaint Louverture, which sees the French cast out of Haiti and an independent Haitian nation declared. And in Latin America, of course, we see independence in the revolutions of Simone Bolivar and José de San Martín in South America, as well as the Mexican Revolution as well, which leads to an independent Mexico. So these series of rebellions, of course, are deeply connected to those ideas of the Enlightenment and also discontent with imperial rule that had existed within their bounds. The French subjects specifically were rebelling against their own monarchy, who they saw as oppressive and limiting the especially bourgeoisie of the Third Estate. Furthermore, with this increasing discontent with imperial rule, we see slave resistance challenging existing authorities in the Americas. Some examples of slave resistance, in addition to the Haitian Revolution, would include maroon societies, which developed in the Caribbean and Brazil, slaves who ran away from the brutal treatment that they were receiving, especially on sugar plantations and other areas of work, as they languished in slavery, or chattel slavery, more specifically. And they developed their own outlying societies. In North America as well, including the United States, slave resistance was found in many ways. Some slave resistance was found in running away and escaping the conditions of servitude. I don't know if running away has the correct connotation there, but escaping to freedom may be a better way to say it. We also see slave resistance in acts such as machine breaking or sabotage. But there was also outright slave resistance and rebellion, including the image here showing Nat Turner and his slave rebellion. Although in North America we do not see, or at least in the United States, we do not see any slave resistance at the level of success that the Haitian Revolution has. We also see in this time period increasing questions about political authority and growing nationalism, which contribute to anti-colonial movements. The two major anti-colonial movements that we have in this time period, as you see on the left, is the Indian Revolt of 1857, also called the Sepoy Rebellion. This was a result of the British East India Company ruling ruling India, and using local Indians, both Muslim and Hindu Indians, in their personal military. Now, this is a company that has, or a corporation that has its own military. And they were using it, of course, to establish control over trade in India. But the Sepoy soldiers, the Indian soldiers in this British East India Company military, revolt in 1857 and fight for independence. The British government sends in its military, and the rebellion is eventually put down. However, it becomes a major milestone or mark in the history of India. It also ends up leading to more direct control of India under the British Raj, which will last all the way until the 1940s. In China, as you see on the right, there is another anti-colonial movement, the Boxer Rebellion, which is tacitly approved by the Qing dynasty, which was a rebellion that sought to expel European forces from China. And the Boxers fought against Europeans, especially the British and the French, but eventually this rebellion is put down, not only at their own detriment, but also to the embarrassment of the government and a more direct control of Europe within China. It will eventually be one of the final mistakes of the Qing dynasty before it totally collapses. And the last thing I want to look at is some rebellions which are quite unique for this time period. Just to give you an idea of the variety of rebellion or resistance to imperial rule that was found, some rebellions that we have in this time period, 1750 to 1900, are influenced by diverse religious ideas. One of the most notable is the image you see on the right, the Xhosa cattle killing movement in southern Africa. The Xhosa people had been at odds with Europeans in southern Africa for quite some time. They had their differences with the Dutch, and they resisted Dutch colonialism, and they also resisted the British, as the British had tried to establish control over them. And as a result of a vision that a young girl claimed to have amongst the Xhosa people, it was believed that by the Xhosa people slaughtering their animals, primarily cattle, and destroying their agricultural yields as a form of kind of sacrifice, that the spirits of the Xhosa people would drive the British and Europeans out of southern Africa. So this slaughter occurs, the destruction of these crops occur, but the British go nowhere. And instead, the Xhosa people experience a large famine, and thousands of them die. Many of the ones who survive blame it on some people who refuse to kill their animals. But this religious hysteria was not unique to southern Africa. we saw, as I mentioned earlier, the Taiping Rebellion was had some religious undertones to it. But the image on the left that you see here comes from the United States itself, where a practice known as the ghost dance is sweeps across the western United States among Native American peoples who undertake this religious ritual in the hopes that, again, spirits of the native peoples will drive away these white settlers, these Americans who have been encroaching on Native American land and taking it from them. Overall, this is a big key concept in terms of revolutionary movements and discontent with imperial rule. So take a look through the key concepts. Make sure that you understand the wording of the key concepts. Make sure you understand how subjects challenged imperial governments, examples of slave resistance, anti-colonial movements, rebellions from religious ideas, and of course the major rebellions of the American, French, Haitian, and Latin American revolutions. If you break this key concept down a little bit more, especially this third big idea, it will not be so overwhelming. All right, our fourth big idea and our last for this key concept is that the global spread of European political and social thought and the increasing number of rebellions stimulated new transnational ideologies and solidarities. Basically, as these new European political and social ideas developed, not just Enlightenment ideas from the late 1800s or late 18th century, but also ideas of socialism from the 19th century that come out of the Industrial Revolution, those ideas will spread far and wide and become rallying cries for people across national borders. There is discontent with monarchist and imperial rule, and it encouraged the development of new political ideologies. The first one, liberalism, might sound pretty familiar to you. Ideas of liberty and equality are espoused by liberalism, and generally this idea of liberalism promotes the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of press, a free market capitalist society, secular governments separated from religious influence, and ideas of democracy. Liberalism became a foundation for much of the Western world's governments, especially in the United States, and the ideas that came out of the French Revolution. But it wasn't the only one. We also see socialism, which advocated a sharing of the production of goods, the distribution of goods, and a fair exchange of goods between everyone. Socialism did not want to see one group benefit and another fail, and instead it believed in kind of communal ownership of the means of production and the profits. And a more radical view of socialism, what we might consider to be extreme socialism, was advocated by Karl Marx, who you see pictured here, and that is the idea of communism. Communism wanted the complete overthrow of capitalism. It wanted the proletariat, or the working masses, to rise up and seize the means of production from the bourgeoisie. And communism develops as an idea in the mid-1800s. In fact, the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848 as a response to growing inequalities and challenges that come with industrialization. And the phrase that tends to sum up communism is "from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." The idea that everyone will perform at their ability and share based on their needs. And the last idea I want to leave you with is the development, or growing development across borders, for women's rights. Demands for women's suffrage and an emergent feminism challenge political and gender hierarchies and will not only impact time period 5, but will have massive impacts on our worldviews in time period 6. So we see several demands for women's suffrage and examples of emergent feminism in this time period. One we see with Mary Wollstonecraft, pictured on the far left, an Enlightenment thinker who challenges people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. She writes A Vindication of the Rights of a Woman, which really lays the groundwork for the development of modern feminism, applying those Enlightenment ideals not just to men, but to women as well. Olympe de Gouges, who you see there in the middle, pens the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen, where she takes that Declaration of the Rights of Man that came out of the French Revolution and advocates for those ideas to be applied across the board, not just to men, but to women. Olympe de Gouges was also very forward-thinking in terms of women's rights, as she advocated for way ahead of her time for greater freedom for women, both freedom in expressing ideas and participating in government and social and in the social sphere, but also sexual freedom for women. Olympe de Gouges, very interesting writer, eventually though loses her head in the Reign of Terror because she is accused of supporting the monarchy. But she shouldn't probably have written, it seems, a play where she defends the monarchy, though that's still up for debate. And in the United States, we also see a push for women's suffrage that comes out of the Seneca Falls Convention in Seneca Falls, New York in the year 1848. The Women's Rights Convention that convenes pens the Declaration of Sentiments, which demands, among other things, that the rights that men are afforded in the United States should also be given to women, and that women should have the right to vote. It would be another 70 years before women would get that right, but it would be the birth of the modern suffragette movement in the U.S. As you can see from these examples, issues of women's rights certainly extended far beyond national borders, and we see them develop as a transnational ideology and solidarity. And one of many new ideas that come out of this time period that seek to change the political and the social ways the world works. That's it for Key Concept 5.3. Thank you for staying with me. There is a lot in this key concept. So if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. And I'll be back for Key Concept 5.4. Thank you and have a good day.